We're going to be reading Habakkuk 1:12 through 2 verse 5. I know we don't normally go over chapters, but just a reminder for you, if you didn't realize that the chapter divisions in your Bible, they are very helpful in helping us find places to go in our Bible, but they're not inspired. Sometimes you'll go from chapter 1 to chapter 2 like tonight, and the thought continues. It doesn't stop because somebody put chapter divisions there in the Bible. The thought continues, and that's the text we've got tonight. So we're going to read Habakkuk 1 verse 12 through chapter 2 and verse 5. So let's read these verses, and then I'll remind you of where we came from last week. So it says in verse number 12, this is Habakkuk's response to what God just revealed to him, that the Babylonians are going to be the ones to judge Judah. So this is what he said. Art thou not from everlasting, O Lord my God, mine Holy One? We shall not die, O Lord. Thou hast ordained them for judgment, and Almighty God, thou hast established them for correction, speaking of the Babylonians. Thou art of purer eyes than to behold evil, and canst not look on iniquity. Wherefore lookest thou upon them that deal treacherously, and holdest thy tongue when the wicked devoureth, the man that is more righteous than he? And makest men as the fishes of the sea, as the creeping things that have no ruler over them. They take up all of them with the angle. They catch them in their net and gather them in their drag. Therefore they rejoice and are glad. Therefore they sacrifice under their net and burn incense under their drag. And because by them their portion is fat and their meat plenteous, shall they therefore empty their net and not spare continually to slay the nations? Then continue speaking in chapter 2. I will stand upon my watch, and set me upon the tower, and will watch to see what he will say unto me, and what I shall answer when I am reproved. And the Lord answered me and said, Write the vision, make it plain upon tables, that he may run that readeth it. For the vision is yet for an appointed time, but at the end it shall speak and not lie, though it tarry. Wait for it, because it will surely come, it will not tarry. Behold, his soul which is lifted up is not upright in him, but the just shall live by faith. He also, because he transgresseth by wine, he is a proud man, neither keepeth at home, who enlargeth his desire as hell, and is death, and cannot be satisfied, but gathereth unto him all nations, and heapeth unto him all people. Let's go to the Lord in prayer one more time tonight. Father, we are so thankful for what we just heard and song, and before we even move to ask you for anything tonight, we just want to say thank you for the cross. Lord, thank you for the blood. Thank you that it's not any merits of anything we've done. It is one simple thing. The man on the middle cross said, we can come. And we praise you for that tonight. And now as we turn to your word, I ask that you would give us eyes to see and give us ears to hear the truth of your word. Lord, as we're coming to a portion of Scripture that may seem a little bit difficult on the surface, I pray that you would just help us to see, give us eyes to see by your Spirit. Help us to draw near to you in your word tonight. In Jesus' name, amen. Human beings, if you think about it, we're naturally we're naturally hardwired to oppose bad news, aren't we? Nobody hears bad news and is like, yeah, that's good, I like that. Unless you're somebody that's got some issues in the head or something. But we don't hear bad news and think, oh, I wanted to hear that. That's how it's going. I got bad news. That's how things are. Let's go. I'm excited about it. No, we don't respond like that. You know, if we get a bad doctor's report, what's our first reaction? What can we do about it? What can we fix it? How can we change this? How can we make this better? Maybe you got dumped by a guy or a girl in high school or in college or even later in life, and you immediately receive the phone call, or in our day, you receive a text, which isn't very good, or you get told in person, and what's your first response? It's, what can we do to fix it? How can we change the situation? We are naturally opposed to bad news, and we want to change it as quickly as we can. Well, tonight, we're looking at a man who had that kind of response to what God just said to him in verses 5 to 11 of chapter 1. This is Habakkuk's response to God telling him what he would do. Now, what is this in response to? In case you maybe forgot or weren't here last week, in verses 1 to 11, we're in this book, this minor prophet of Habakkuk, and Habakkuk was one of those prophets that prophesied before the nation of Babylon came in and took Judah captive, and they took them to exile. And he prays to God in the first few verses, basically like, God, Judah's wicked. How can you sit back as all of these people are sinning against you? The law's not doing its job. Everything's bad. Everything's awful. God, where are you at in all this? Why have you not made your people right and judged your people for their sin? And then God responds in verses 5 to 11, and he says, I'm going to answer your prayer, Habakkuk, but you're not going to believe what I'm going to do. He says, yes, Habakkuk, I'm going to answer your prayer. I'm going to make this right. I'm going to do what you're asking of me, but it's not going to be the answer you expected to your prayer. By the way, it's just a reminder. Sometimes we're going to pray, we're going to ask God to do something. God says, I'm going to do it, but He's not going to do it in the way we expect Him to do it. And He says, all right, let me show you what I'm going to do. I'm going to raise up the Chaldeans. That's like saying, He's saying, I'm going to raise up the Babylonians. That's like saying, I'm going to raise up Nazi Germany. I'm going to raise up Iran or Iraq or wherever. I'm going to raise up the bad guys, and they're going to come in. They're going to pillage you. They're going to take your houses. They're going to go from east to west. They're going to go throughout the whole land. It's about to be a massacre and an exile in the land of Judah. So when we come to verse number 12 tonight, Habakkuk is giving his second complaint. So in chapter 1, you have the first complaint of Habakkuk. God, where are you at? Then you have God's response. I'm going to show up, and I'm going to use the Babylonians. Then you have Habakkuk's second complaint is what we're seeing tonight. And his second complaint can be summarized basically like this. I wanted you to answer my prayer, but not like that. I wanted you to work, but not in that way. Yes, he wanted the people of God to be corrected for their sin. He wanted he knew that God's people were living in great wickedness, but did he think that God would use the Babylonians, the wicked pagan sinners, to do it? Absolutely not. You see, Habakkuk got his prayer answered, but not in the way he wanted or hoped. So tonight, in verses 12 to 17, we have a bit of an arguing prophet. Last week we saw a questioning prophet, but tonight we're going to see an arguing prophet. He starts to speak and cry out to God and be like, this is not the way I thought things should go. And even before we press further into the text tonight, how many of us have ever had a response like that to something God has allowed or sent into our lives? We said, God, I wanted you to do something, but not sickness, not death, not cancer, not this, not that, not those things. God, what you did is not what I expected. And that's how we see from Habakkuk. This is a groaning, questioning, wondering prophet. God, why did you do things, or why are you going to do things the way you're going to do it? So tonight, this text is going to show us that Habakkuk has, first of all, a disrupted and disturbed faith. Notice his disrupted and disturbed faith, beginning at verse number 12. So he's questioning God in these verses. Notice what he says in verse number 12. He says, art thou not from everlasting, O Lord, my God, mine Holy One? We shall not die, O Lord. Thou hast ordained them for judgment, and Almighty God, thou hast established them for correction. His argument begins with a very simple question of, God, is this really who you are? You are the everlasting God. You are the Lord. You're the covenant God of Judah, of Israel. You're the God of promises. God, we're the ones, we're not supposed to die. God, you made eternal promises to us. You promised eternal things to us. We cannot die. And they're the bad guys. They're the wicked ones. How are they going to die? His question is basically, how can we die and they not? And before we begin accusing Habakkuk a little bit too much for questioning God, I want you to notice something, what he does here. He knows very well who God is and who God is to Judah. He knows very well his Bible and that God has made eternal promises to him. That's why he calls him Lord. We see that small capital letters there multiple times here. That's the covenant name. That's Yahweh or Jehovah. It's referring to God's covenant name for Israel, that he is the God of promises to them. He points to God's covenant name, and this is why he is so perplexed here by what God has decreed and determined to do. But I want you to notice something here. Even though he doesn't understand why God is doing what he's doing or what exactly God is doing, he's still confident in who God is in a sense. I like what Kevin DeYoung said that helped me see this. He said he is confident that even though the world seems to have changed, God has not changed. By speaking to God like this, Habakkuk is basically saying, God, I know who you are and I know who we are to you, and that's why it's so perplexing to me, because what God was doing in that moment didn't align with who Habakkuk thought God was. It doesn't make sense to him more than anything here. And we're going to see how that is understood later on. But then notice what he said about Babylon. He's like, all right, God, we can't die. Those are the guys you've established for correction, for judgment. He's like, don't you? He's kind of like shifting the blame a little bit, be like, not me, not us. We're not the bad guys. They're the bad guys. And he's perplexed. How will the wicked ones be the ones to judge us. You see, Habakkuk doesn't understand how God can judge Judah by people that he thinks are more wicked than they are. But then he continues further. He's struggling here. He's like, God, I know you're holy. I know you're just. I know you are God. How are you going to work in this way? And then he continues to ask by saying in verse 13, thou art of purer eyes than behold evil and canst not look on iniquity. Now is that a true statement? It's an absolutely true statement. God is not a God who can sit back and just watch as wickedness unfolds with pleasure in his eyes. As I was writing this today, I was thinking about it. Some of us are peculiar in the way we like things done, or weird, or particular, or other names somebody might call you that you wouldn't want said about you. Some of us are particular in the way we like things being done. I think about it with the yard. I'm the one who mows our land, and I don't like mowing for a few hours each week, but I also know I like seeing stripes mowed a certain way. I like seeing everything done a certain way, and sometimes I've seen other people outside of my family doing it. I'm like, I don't like the way they did it, and what do you want to do? You want to go and get on the lawnmower and take over for yourself. Now, if somebody wants to volunteer to do that, trust me, you can have it in the big picture, but when you're a particular person, you like the way things are done, and you can't just sit back and watch as someone doesn't clean like you want them to clean, or cook like you want them to cook, or do what you want them to do. You got to get in there because you're like, you can't do that bad. I got to get in there. And in a much greater sense, that's what Habakkuk is saying about God here. He says, I know who you are. I know you're holy. I know you're just. And it does not align with your nature for you have pure eyes than behold evil. He says, your eyes are so pure, you can't just watch as wickedness unfolds with pleasure. And you can't look on iniquity. Now, that doesn't mean that God cannot see iniquity, but the phrase there, can't look on iniquity, gives the idea of looking on transgression done to others or sin done to others with pleasure in his eyes. He said, God, you're too holy. I know you can't just sit back and watch. So then that's why he asked this question at the end of verse 13. Wherefore lookest thou upon them that deal treacherously, and holdest thy tongue when the wicked devoureth the man that is more righteous than he. So he says, God, I know you are too holy, too pure to look as wickedness unfolds in front of your eyes, as wrong is done to other people. So how can you, in his mind, he says, God, if you're going to send the Babylonians to Habakkuk at this moment, he says, God, that means you're going to do something where you're going to sit back and watch as wickedness unfolds. They deal treacherously. How can you watch? How can you hold your tongue when the wicked devoureth the man that is more righteous than he? That's what he says at the end of verse 13. How can you be silent? How can you sit back, be quiet, as the Babylonians ransack your people? This doesn't make any sense to Habakkuk. But did you notice the final part of it, of verse 13? The man that is more righteous than he. He says, basically, God, I know we have sinned, but our sin does not compare to their sin. He's looking out and he says, God, I know our sin's bad, but it ain't as bad as their sin. It's not as awful as their sin. You see, Habakkuk, it seems, does not understand the full weight of Judah's sin. You see, because Judah was the people of God, are they not held to a higher standard than Babylon? Because Judah were the people that they said to God, we will be your people. You will be our God. We covenant together with you. And by the way, there were promises and curses given in the law that said if you do not keep it, by the way, no man was ever going to be able to keep it. That's the whole point of Jesus coming. But if you do not keep it, judgment's coming. Yet Habakkuk, in a sense, in a little bit of self-righteousness, he looks out and is like, I know we're bad, but they're way worse than us. So God, how are you doing it this way? So he's arguing. His argument starts with, God, this doesn't seem to make sense with who you really are. And this doesn't make sense with how you perceive evil. But then he goes further and he's like, how can you allow them to continue in wickedness? Notice how his argument concludes in verses 14 to 17 here. He points to a bit of a fishing illustration here to point out the absurdity of this in his mind. Notice what verse 14 says. And makest men, speaking of God, as the fishes of the sea, as the creeping things that have no ruler over them. He said, here's his conclusion. It's as if God is letting go, giving up rules so that men are like the fish of the sea and creeping things or reptiles. So they're like snakes. They're like the lizards. They have no ruler. In his mind, it's like God is letting chaos unfold in a sense. He's confused. And by the way, But even before we go even further in the text, even if we don't understand it from where Habakkuk is at, haven't we found our places like that in our lives where we see what God is doing and we see what is happening in our lives and it feels like our world is falling apart? Maybe it was during 9/11. I was barely here for that, but I was here, but I don't remember any of it. But during that, you may have been looking around wondering, God, where are you at in all of this? How can this be going on? How can people die like that? God, where are you? That's where Habakkuk is here. Doesn't make any sense. He feels as if God is stepping back and he pictures it as God making men as the fish of the sea and having no ruler over them. But he continues with his analogy. So imagine the men, the captives, are like the fish of the sea. What is Babylon going to do? Notice what he says in verse 15. They take up all of them with the angle or the hook. They catch them in their net and gather them in their drag. Therefore, they rejoice and are glad. Do you see how he pictures Babylon marching through the land, pillaging, and taking people captive? It's like they're going on a fishing trip. So I know we've got some fishermen in our church, and you like to fish, but when you go and catch those fish, you want to catch them, you want to eat them, maybe you want to throw them back. I don't know what, depends on the day, I guess, but you don't look at those fish and have a lot of empathy for them, I'm guessing. You don't look at those fish and be like, man, I'm going to feel so bad when you are on my Blackstone later today and I'm eating you. I'm going to feel so bad. No, you don't feel like that because they're fish. You shouldn't really feel like that. But that's how Habakkuk thinks Babylon sees the people of God as they're going to come through the land. They're going to come through the land. They're going to hook them they're going to have them hooked with the angle. That's what the word means. They're going to catch them in their net. They're going to gather them in their drag. They're going to be fishing. They're going to be throwing nets out. They're going to be pulling them in. And he says they're going to rejoice and be glad as they go through the land and they're taking Jedediah and Zephaniah and all the people captive. They're rejoicing. It's as if they're catching fish. It's as if they're going on a fishing trip. But then notice what he says in verse 16. So that's pretty bad. They're just going through the land rejoicing in the people they take captive. But verse 16 says, gets even worse. Therefore, they sacrifice unto their net and burn incense unto their drag, because by them their portion is fat and their meat plenteous. As they go through the land, as they take men as the fish of the sea, and they get done, and what do? They turn around, the very same hook, the very same net that they caught the men with, they offer sacrifices to it. Idol worshiping is what they do. They turn around and they worship the very thing they used to catch the people they took into exile. Why? Notice what he said at the end of verse 16. Because by them, by the net, by the drag, by the hook, their portion is fat and their meat plenteous. They see, like you would if you go out and you go fishing, you catch them with your rod and your hook, or you catch them with your net, however you do it, and you get done, and it's by that you caught a bunch of fish. And they say, by our actions, by us conquering, we have caught and taken these people captive. So they turn around and they bow down and worship that stuff as if we're their God. What's he doing here? He's pointing out the absolute vileness of Babylon. They see men as nothing more than the fish of the sea to capture and catch in their nets. This is savagery. And even more than that, they're vile, they're savages. They worship the net they caught the men with. So that's why he asked this in verse 17. Shall they therefore empty their net and not spare continually to slay the nations? The nation of Babylon is about the equivalent of like a teenage boy when he is hungry. You know how it is. Those of you who have been teenage boys before or had teenage boys before, you know something's very true. They are always hungry. And some of us don't ever grow out of that stage either, but you can't keep food in the house. If you got leftovers, yeah, I'll eat it, I'll take it. Call me Mikey, I'll eat it, I'll take it. We'll take care of it. And that's how Babylon is with people. They are just going through any land in their path, and they are taking them out. They are devouring them. It's like this. They come, they get a fresh catch. Notice how he says, shall they therefore empty their net? They throw their net out, they catch it, they get rid of that net, and what do they immediately do? They immediately do it again. They go fishing again. That's why he says, and spare not continually to slay the nations. How in the world can they keep doing this continually? So what all is he saying here? In verses 12 to 17, what's he doing here? He is questioning God's ways, basically. He's saying, how in the world can God use this people to bring judgment upon us? Doesn't make sense. And if we didn't read any further and we stopped and we just saw that, wouldn't we think the same thing? Like, yeah, God, you're faithful to Israel. Yeah, God, you're too holy to look at this. Yeah, they're very, very wicked. How, God, can you do this? You see, having heard what God is going to do, Habakkuk doesn't understand how that lines up with who God is. It's like the math is not working here. 2 + 2 is not equaling 5 for Habakkuk here. He says, God, I know who you are, and what you are doing does not make sense here. Now, what is going on? Was God wrong? Of course not. We're going to see why in just a moment. You see, Habakkuk's problem was a lack of understanding, and I think 2 ways. One was he didn't understand how bad Judah's sin really was. Because they had become like the pagans, God would use the pagans to judge them. Because they were sacrificing to Moloch, like the pagans were, God would judge them. But then also, I think this is the greater point. God's ways are not confined to a certain box of human expectations. The way God works, in other words, doesn't have to fit in our box. There are times when God is going to work in a way, and we're not going to understand the way God is working, and I'm sure you have seen this to be true throughout your life. And yeah, we can't look at God and be like, God, you're unjust. You can't work in that way because God is not bound to our ways. Yes, it is absolutely true. God is holy. He's the God of His people. He's going to judge. By the way, we're going to see it later. He's going to judge the wicked Babylonians. But all this is true. But yet, Habakkuk doesn't have a category or a definition for the way God is working in all this. It makes no sense to him. You see, his argument is rooted in wrong expectations of how God must work. Because he's like, I know all these things are true about God. I know that you can't look on evil. I know that you must judge the wicked. I know that you must stay faithful to your people. I know that we cannot ultimately die. But the way God is doing it doesn't make sense with what Habakkuk knows to be true about God. And if we're honest, do we not often see ourselves in the way Habakkuk responds here? Maybe it's not going to look in the same way, but maybe it's something like, I thought I'd be healed by now. I thought that relational problem would be fixed by now. I thought it was going to turn out differently than it did. Whatever that particular application may be for you, for all of us, there are situations and moments in our lives when we see what God is doing and how God has worked, and we step back and think, God, are you in this? How are you working in this? How are you moving in this? And in these verses, he has spent all acknowledging and arguing with God. But notice what happens in the beginning of chapter number 2. And this is why we couldn't stop at verse number 17. Even though if you were ready to go home, you'd probably be glad to be out at 7:48 on a Wednesday night. But we've got to go to chapter 2. Notice what he says. I will stand upon my watch and set me upon the tower and will watch to see what he will say unto me and what I shall answer when I am reproved. He prepares for a crashing wave of divine response here. He says, notice, I will set me upon a watch. I will set me upon a tower. This is the language of going to a watchtower, being positioned to a spot, to be ready to see, to hear, to know whatever is going to come. And he does this with God. He says, I'm putting myself in a position to hear what you should say to me. That's a very important response here. Because before this, what did Habakkuk do? He was questioning God. And by the way, let's not miss this. Sometimes it's okay for us to look at God and say, God, I don't understand what you're doing. I don't understand how you're working. But Habakkuk's next response is just as important because he says, God, I don't understand what you're doing, but God, I will wait and see what you say to me because I want to know where you're coming from. I want to know where you are at. You see, whenever we pour out our heart to God, we cannot plug our ears and say, God, I've got my mind made up. You're wrong. I don't understand. There's no way you could change my mind. Instead, we take our hands out and we says, God, I'm going to sit back and I'm going to listen because maybe I'm wrong. Maybe I don't understand what you're doing here. Maybe I don't understand how you are working here. And did you notice what he was preparing for when God would reply? He says, I'm preparing to respond. He's got a response ready. Notice, when I am reproved. Habakkuk was preparing, God, you're probably going to rock my world a bit. You're probably going to change my mind a bit. You're probably going to speak to me and you're going to show me how the way that I am thinking is not the right way to think. How many of us have ever felt like that in our own lives? You know, when something happens in our life and we internally or externally, we start arguing with God and questioning God and all the while, and then we're sitting there and we're like, yeah, I'm probably wrong on this. I'm definitely wrong on this. I know that I don't understand all the ways that God is doing. That's at least how my mind thinks. I don't know if that's how yours thinks. And that's what Habakkuk's saying. He says, God, I'll respond when I am reproved. He's preparing for God to show him why he's doing what he's doing. So let's see God's response. And notice secondly, Habakkuk's certain and trustworthy God. So Habakkuk has a disrupted and disturbed faith, but Habakkuk also has a certain and trustworthy God. In his response, he basically gets two parts from God. One is, my plan is not being stopped. And the second part is, even if it doesn't look good now, you can still trust me. Notice how he responds in verse number 2. And the Lord answered me and said, Habakkuk, let me show you the way why I'm doing what I'm doing. Nope. Did he say that? No. Did he say, Habakkuk, let me explain everything about what I'm doing. Let me show you why I'm doing what I'm doing. No, notice what he said. Write the vision. Make it plain upon the tables. Did God answer really any of Habakkuk's questions in this verse? No. The Lord basically says to Habakkuk, Habakkuk, my plan is not being stopped. He calls Habakkuk to submit here. He says, make it plain upon the tables in verse 2 that he may run that readeth it. Did you see what God did not do? He did not explain here. He didn't go to where Habakkuk was here. All he did was command Habakkuk to say, write the vision. Remember how the book started? It started with the vision, the oracle, the prophecy of Habakkuk. And he says, my word from chapter 1 about what I will do has not changed, even if you don't understand it. God's plans in our lives, even when we do not understand why he's doing what he's doing or all the details of it, this is an important reminder to us that God is saying to us, maybe in your life, my plans haven't changed. You have to trust me. That's what he's saying here. He says, write the vision. He says, my plan is not changing. But then also he said, it's coming soon. He says, here's your response, Habakkuk. It's not to change my plan. It's to submit to my plan and tell everybody what I'm doing. So he says, write it upon the tables. The word for table here is the same word that is used to describe what God did with the Ten Commandments, with the law of the covenant. What did he do? He wrote it in the tables. Now, Habakkuk probably wasn't writing in stone. He wasn't engraving it in stone. But whether it was wood or whether it was stone, whatever it was, he says, Habakkuk, write it down. And if you write something down, you know what that means? It's set. Set in stone, as that phrase goes. It's set in stone. He says, write it down. He says, make it plain. My plan's not going anywhere. You see, he may have disagreed with what God was doing and how he was doing it, but his disagreement didn't change, and by the way, couldn't change God's plan. While we may sometimes question why God is doing what he's doing, and in your life, I think that's a fair response because throughout the Bible characters, they respond like that. The psalmist asks God, where are you at? How long, O Lord? It's fine for us to immediately, when something happens, say, God, I don't understand. But you know where we must get to eventually? Is not to stay and say, God, I don't understand. Eventually, we must fall on our face before him and say, God, I don't understand what you're doing, but I trust you and I submit to your plan. That's what he tells Habakkuk to do here. He says to write with urgency. He says to write, to make it plain. Why? That he may run that readeth it. He says, you got to write so that when you give it to your messenger, he can run and let everybody know. Why? Because the Babylonians were coming. They had to be ready. Plan wasn't changing. But notice what he said here in verse number 3. For the vision is yet for an appointed time. But at the end it shall speak and not lie. Though it tarry, wait for it, because it will surely come. It will not tarry. So Habakkuk had to write it down, to do it quickly, to get it there, because it's coming and it will come. His plan will be fulfilled when he decrees for it to be fulfilled. Now, when you read verse number 3, isn't that a very interesting and kind of odd verse on the surface? Let's read through it again slowly. He says, the vision is yet for an appointed time, but at the end shall speak and not lie. So he's basically saying the vision is coming to pass when I say it is at an appointed time. Not yet, but it'll happen at the end, and it's going to prove to be true. Basically, it's going to be fulfilled. The Babylonians are coming. But then notice what he said. He said, though it tarry, wait for it. He says, if it seemed to be delaying, just wait, Habakkuk. Though it tarry, just wait. But then he says, it will surely come. It will not tarry. Now, that's interesting, isn't it? That's a little bit of an odd phrasing there, isn't it? It's tarrying and not tarrying at the same time. How in the world can both be true here? Well, what's very interesting is these two words in the Hebrew are actually different Hebrew words here. And the first means to linger, to delay, or simply hasn't happened yet. He says, Habakkuk, I know you're looking back, and the Babylonians haven't come yet. I see that. But then the second means it will not delay forever. In other words, just because you haven't seen my plans come to pass yet does not mean my plans are not coming to pass. And when they come to pass, nobody's stopping them. Now, this isn't the main application here, but it's so worth pointing out here. There are many times, both in goodness and in judgment, we may think, God, you promised this, but why is it tarrying? Why hasn't this happened yet? Why hasn't this worked out yet? And here's his reminder to Habakkuk, even though it is a word of judgment here, it is this. It may seem like God's plans are delayed in the moment, but just keep waiting because his plans will not be delayed forever. God's plans may be delayed for a moment in our mind, but God's plans, if he decrees it and says it's done, they'll not be delayed forever. And though this isn't a text on a word of judgment, I think there are some saints in this room that need to hear that tonight for God's good plans in your life. You may sit back and wonder, God, where are you at in this? Why haven't you fixed this yet? Why haven't you turned this around yet? Why haven't you worked here yet? And God is reminding you through this to Habakkuk is, my plans, you may be waiting right now, may tarry for a moment, but his plans always come to pass. God's plans will not fail. They will not stop. He will do what he plans to do. But then in verses 4 to 5, he does begin to answer Habakkuk's question a little bit. What was he questioning in the chapter 1? He's basically like, God, they are wicked. I don't understand. Well, notice what he says in verse number 4. Behold, his soul, which is lifted up, is not upright in him, but the just shall live by faith. He says his soul, speaking of the man, the one that is going through the land, that is sacrificing to his net, that is doing all that wicked stuff. He says it is upright in him, but the just, notice, shall live by faith. Now, the just is the opposite of the one who is not upright. So if the just are living by faith, they're going to prosper, if they're going to ultimately succeed. What does that mean about the prideful, upright man, the one who's full of pride? He'll not live. If the just are going to live, that means the proud and the unrighteous will not live. Basically, and as he's going to say in the next verse, and then even more throughout the rest of chapter 2, and we'll see that next time, it's basically this. Habakkuk, they may look like they're prospering right now, but they're not going to prosper forever. It's like they may be an instrument of me, of my wrath upon Judah for this time, but because they are proud, because they are wicked, because they do not trust me, they will die and not last forever. And the whole point of this text is seen in that latter part about the just shall live by faith. But before we do that, notice what he says about the proud man in verse number 5. He is a proud, drunken man because he transgresseth by wine. Why is his soul not upright in him? Why will he die? It's because he's a man who deals deceitfully by wine. He's a drunk man. In other words, I also think he's saying here, he's too high on himself. He thinks too much of himself. He's drunk on wine. He's drunk on his own ego in a sense here. So this is the picture of the proud man, but then also neither keepeth at home. The phrase keepeth there gives the idea of finding rest. That guy that is out there and he's conquering the land, he's doing all this stuff in Babylon, the warrior, God says he's proud, he's exalted, but he can't find rest. His soul is never satisfied. This is what he says next in the end of verse 5. Who enlargeth his desire as hell and is in its death and cannot be satisfied, but gathereth unto him all nations and heapeth unto him all people. In the Old Testament, the Hebrew word for hell, which is Sheol, is a bit of a broader term than just what we think of when we think of hell here. And when you see it in this context, hell and death are synonymous here. And you know, hell and death are never satisfied. Death is never satisfied. I don't know if you ever thought about that or not, but people just keep dying. Death is never satisfied. Death has never reached a day, and there will be a day when it does reach this point, but death has never had a day when it's like, you know what? I got my last person. I'm full. I'm satisfied. And what the Lord is saying to Habakkuk, he says, this man is like death in that he is never satisfied. But as he gathers unto him all nations, heaps unto him all people, he's never, ever satisfied. In the verses after this, and we'll see those next time, God's going to pronounce woe upon the Babylonians through Habakkuk. And here's what his point is to him here. He says, I know you don't understand how the wicked are going to be the ones I'm going to use to judge Judah. I know that you don't understand that. That doesn't make sense to you. But I want you to know something. The roles have not changed. The wicked will still be taken care of. They will still be wiped out. They will not last forever. And his big point to him is this: the just shall live by faith. You see, Habakkuk wanted God to stop the Babylonians from coming. He wanted God to change his circumstances, but God wouldn't change his circumstances. Instead, God says, here's how you live even when what's going on in the world around you isn't what you want it to be. How? The just shall live by his faith in God. You see, Habakkuk couldn't change his circumstances and God's plan in the world, but what Habakkuk could do is change the way he was trusting in God. When God's plans are coming in our life, and if they're not what we expect them to be or what we hope to be or what we plan for them to be, God's response to us is not often, I'm going to change my mind and fix your circumstances to be easy for you. Instead, God's response is says, you want to live? You want to prosper? You want to have life? Live by faith in me. God lifts Habakkuk's eyes above the circumstances he doesn't understand, and he says, you will live. The just live by faith in me. Now, when we hear the phrase, the just shall live by faith, don't our ears perk up a little bit? Doesn't that sound a little bit familiar? Doesn't it sound like I've heard that before? Maybe you've never read it in Habakkuk. Maybe you didn't know where Habakkuk was before this, but I'm sure you've heard this phrase read where? Romans 1, 16 and 17. For I'm not ashamed of the gospel of Christ, for it is the power of God to everyone, unto salvation, to everyone that believeth, to the Jew first, and also to the Greek. For therein is the righteousness of God revealed from faith to faith. As it is written over there in that little book that no one reads in the Old Testament, the just shall live by faith. When Paul wrote that to the Romans, his point is that through the gospel, both Jew and Gentile are saved through faith in Christ. In that, God's righteousness is revealed as he justifies, declares righteous sinners to make them righteous. And then he quotes from Habakkuk to say, and those who are made righteous live by faith. They live by faith. So how does all this connect together? Why does Paul quote that in the New Testament? Why does he refer to what God said to Habakkuk here? Well, here's the main idea. In Habakkuk's day, he would live like a just one by trusting in the God of his salvation. Even if the circumstances weren't what he wanted to be or expect them to be, he says, God, I know that you are my salvation, you are my God, and I will trust in you. And in our day, and in Paul's day, we live by faith just as they did, by trusting in his salvation, whether for the first time or even more to our lives, that we set our hope even in him, even in his gospel, when our world around us is falling apart. I think that is the bigger and greater point of the just living by faith here. It is that as we look around at circumstances that don't make sense, that don't seem to align with what we expect God to be doing or a way we expect him to be working, we say, God, I'm putting my hope in you. I don't understand what all you're doing, but I'm trusting by you. To live by faith means our faith may be shook up by our circumstances, but we say, God, I'll still depend on you. Because God will always do good. He'll always do right. And he will, as he says to Habakkuk, going to work it out in the end. So, if you're in a circumstance tonight that you don't understand what God is doing or how he's doing, I want you to hear the encouragement of God from this text tonight, which is, the just shall live by faith. The just lift their eyes above our circumstances and say, God, I'm trusting in you because you always do good and right, even if I don't understand everything about what you're doing and why you're doing it.